We are live now.
Well, welcome everybody to a joint briefing from the Senate Budget and Taxation Subcommittee on Education and Business Administration. I'm once again very pleased and proud to be joining one of my good friends, Chairman Ben Barnes, and the Subcommittee on Education and Economic Development from the House Appropriations Committee. Today, we're having a briefing from the Maryland School for the Blind based on a joint chairman's report that they were very timely in getting back to us with. I know I speak for both Chairman Barnes and my subcommittee that I serve on when we talk about how important the population that you all serve are. We look forward to continuing to work with you on this, and Chairman Barnes made a point of reminding me today on how important it is that any restricted money that you have, that we try to release that as quick as possible based on your your responsiveness. And with that, we just wanted to make sure that we went through and we briefed everybody on what you had in your responses for the Joint Chairman's report. Just again, for housekeeping for the subcommittees before we turn it over to the superintendent, if anybody has a question, we just ask you to please utilize the participant under the participants icon, the raise the hand feature. That way we can make sure that we call on you. And with that, before I go ahead and recognize the superintendent, Chairman Barnes, is there anything that I missed that you'd like to add?
No, sir, you got it. Welcome, Superintendent. Look forward to hearing the presentation.
So with that, Superintendent Robert Hare, thank you for being here. And as Chairman Barnes indicated, it's your show and you can structure it however you want. And we're interested in hearing from you.
Senator Zucker, Delegate Barnes, thank you very much for this time. I'm going to introduce Mary Malauer. She's our board chair, who has been a great support in all of this work.
Good afternoon, everybody.
And also Kivian Vasquez, who will have to answer any hard questions that are too difficult for me to answer. She's the CFO at the School for the Blind and assisted in the preparation of this report. I'm going to share I can't just share my screen. Just going to share my PowerPoint.
We have a copy of your PowerPoint stashed.
But I can also share your PowerPoint as well if you'd like.
Yeah, and we got it. I think
yes.
That emailed it to everyone.
Sure, however you would like to do it. I'm going to skim through the most important messages. Oh, thank you. All right, I will start then. So if we can go to the slide with Cole's first day of in-person kindergarten. So I'm coming to you live and in person, not a virtual background, from the School for the Blind. We are in session and we've got students on campus, including Cole. This is Cole's first day of in-person kindergarten at the School for the Blind. This picture was taken, like I have my kids and I remember that first day, how important that was for me. But I can't imagine having any of my children going to school during a pandemic. Cole is nonverbal. He's had significant surgeries in his lifetime. He's blind and he's unable to wear a mask safely, which has made it more complicated for our students to assemble this back to school plan. Next slide. So just very briefly, our pandemic response, like all the other schools, we closed on Friday, the 13th of March. And we've been working on how to get back to school. We offered the school as a campus hospital site. We donated PPE. We were like joining the effort. We're all in this together. But then we had the next slide, get to the work of the return to school plan. And the next slide, the most important thing I want to share is how difficult it is to make a plan with students who are so complicated. The cost for PPE, we estimated to be around $300,000. We spent $130,000 at this point. Testing is an important part of our plan because our kids can't mask and they can't socially distance as well. So our health advisors recommended that as well. And I have to give a shout out to Senator Gazzoni and others who helped us advocate with the health department prioritizing our school for COVID testing. They've given us free testing for the next 6 to 8 weeks as part of our back to school plan. The first estimates were around 1.4 million, so we're thankful for that. We've also had wonderful support from parents and friends. We had a parent with a lead donation of $25,000 to assist us with the purchase of PPE so we can get our kids back to school. Next slide. We reopened preschool on October the 26th, and first through third grades came back. It's great to see kids back on campus. They really need to be here. And we're going to bring more students back, hopefully, unless we're closed down because of the pandemic once again. 2 slides up. Our kids need to be back. We really need to do that right. And then the next slide, let's get to slide 12. The Maryland School for the Blind, getting into the report itself, how we got here. We are 167 years old. We've always been here to support Maryland's blind and low vision students. In that time, we were established as a private school, which we're going to get into a little bit. And currently we serve more than 1,000 students representing every jurisdiction in the state through teachers on campus in the on-campus program, as well as across the state, serving in the local schools, in as much as schools are open. The next slide, there is a widening financial gap. When I came on board as superintendent 2 years ago, I was quickly informed about this, as well as the actuarial projections for our pension plan, which has been frozen for many years, but to fund it fully, we needed to increase from $500 to $3 million a year, which was a budget buster for anybody, and certainly for us. So that's where my advocacy work began. And going up 2 slides, all these pictures, by the way, are of the past couple of weeks since we got back to school. In response, we submitted a report a year ago called the self-study report that you asked us to do. And slide 17, the major findings of this report is that Maryland School for the Blind students are not just blind anymore. Used to be, a long time ago, students that would graduate from high school and go on to college and lead fairly independent lives as blind people. That shift has happened, and appropriately so, with IDEA, more mainstreaming, where we serve students out in the mainstream as well. But on campus, our student population has now become from almost none in the 60s to now 96% multiply impaired. Slide 18. The students have complex needs. Some require complete assistance. Some cannot eat orally and must be tube fed. Some have significant behavior disorders. Others are nonverbal and use a lot of assistive communication, and many have wheelchairs. We have the academic population as well, but they're a much smaller portion of our population. Next slide. And one thing that report found was that residential services obviously cost more, especially with our kids with multiple disabilities. But there was no difference in the funding formula for the residential students. Again, a finding from the previous report. The next slide shows the statistics that bear that out. We have 28% more students who are residential at the School for the Blind. And this is also kind of comparative to other schools for the blind across the US. We have more residential population than even other schools for the blind. 86% more of our students have significant multiple disabilities than the School for the Blind. So the next slide shows a little bit of a conversation about cost containment, which has been gradually reducing services and staffing at the school because the funding just never really caught up with that shift in the population. Now getting to the full 2020 JCR report, which was submitted on November the 1st. You were asked us to do revenues and expenses, capital improvement and maintenance, as well as how the considerations for becoming a state agency, which we will go through. So revenues and expenses, if we can keep it on the slide 25 for a few minutes. I'm going to talk through these slides very briefly. So this is FY19 and 20 show basically the actual numbers. It shows what actually happened. FY21 shows MSB board approved budget numbers, which of course in the end will change based on exactly how much we spend of that budget. And then FY22 and 23 include what we feel is appropriate based on the needs of our students for staffing, to provide competitive compensation, and also competitive healthcare benefits, which we're going to talk about a bit later. The full report has the full numbers. Stay here for a second. FY19 and 20 also show good results, but there's a lot more to these numbers than just the bottom line here. It also shows our effort to be fiscally responsible. We've done a lot of cutting and reductions, which impact these numbers that had occurred in or in around these times. But also FY20 shows additional savings that happened due to the pandemic. Also, yes.
Superintendent Harry, I just want to let you know you're doing a great job. I just wanted to make you mindful that when you're turning the papers, it seems like you might be rubbing the microphone because we're getting a lot of feedback. So I just want to make you aware of that. But the presentation's good. Just want to make you aware of when you're switching the papers, we're hearing a lot of the ruffling.
Sorry.
No, you're
Thank
good.
you.
You're good.
Okay. The also not reflected, the pension payment does not show, and I don't understand. I'm not an accountant, and even Kivian trying to explain it to me a million times, I don't understand it. But we actually have a cash cost of $3 million a year, and that is a smooth funding formula in order to avoid having a $4 million cost this year, a $2 million cost the next year. So it's averaged out, but we actually have a cash expense of $3 million a year. And also reflected in these numbers, we refinanced our commercial construction loans with low interest tax exempt loan through MAHIFA, which was based on the guidance that we received from you a couple of years ago. So now that's in effect and impacting the numbers. And I just want to note again that MSB has a private fundraising development office and endowment where we raise millions of dollars to support the operations of the school. So we're also helping to fund ourselves. However, all these efforts are not enough to help make up the differences. Like, for example, the paraprofessionals who are underpaid. And now I'm going to slide 30. So the paraprofessionals at MSB are paid 30% less than Baltimore County. We are a minimum wage employer for these folks. And so that's not a good position to be in when they have to change diapers and deal with behaviors and getting bitten and scratched, when they can go work in Baltimore County and do a less heavy job comparatively, or they can go to work at Walmart and make more money, frankly. So going to the next slide, increasing enrollment, but not staff. We have increased our student population over the past 10 years by 47 students, which is significant for the on-campus program. But we have not increased a number of key positions like OTs, PTs, speech. And so what's happening is people are overwhelmed in their caseloads. They have a lot of students. And next slide, we have also reduced many positions over the years. Behavior specialists, one that we really need, psychologist, music teacher, recreation. We're starting to cut into programs and not able to provide as rich a program. And we do that every year to meet the revenue that we expect to receive. So next slide, reduced benefits. One of the other ways that we cut our expenses was to reduce our health benefits. We were priced pretty much out of the market, $4 million a year for health insurance. We went to an unpopular HMO plan with a very limited physician network. And I want to point out that we have staff who live in Delaware and in Pennsylvania who cannot get to a healthcare site under this plan because they live in a different state. And so it's kind of a disaster for us. We've lost staff. We've also had people turn us down because we're not competitive in our benefits as well as our wages. So going to 36, the funding formula, as we studied the numbers, we were very interested in looking at the funding formula and how that worked. And what we learned was that the formula is identical for the School for the Deaf and the School for the Blind. It's identical. At one time, the funding was identical on a per pupil basis, as well as dollar for dollar. It's exactly the same funding for the different schools. And it's all based on the enrollment and on the foundation amount that's set by the state, but also key is the prior year funding. And as we looked at the School for the Deaf compared to the School for the Blind, that there have been additional bumps through the years that we don't receive. So we haven't been able to keep pace. So next slide. The compensation and benefits in the School for the Deaf, there is an available mechanism in the pay plan statute. And through this, there's a model for us that we don't have a regular way to review our salaries and compensation and get that into the budget. When you look at the School for the Deaf appropriation computation, there's a whole ledger of a COLA increase, salary increase, other bumps that happen that we don't have. And so we just get further and further behind. So that legislation could be a model for MSB. Going to the next slide. And this just shows out how we looked at the formula based on a simple division of the total funding by the enrollment showed an $8,500 difference per pupil. If you multiply that out, it's 3.6 million less in funding based on a per pupil basis, or 15% less per pupil. And what's remarkable to us is that our students are so much more complex in general than School for the Deaf. Not throwing any aspersions towards the School for the Deaf at all. So the next slide 40, the preventative maintenance program requires 1.9 million according to the consultant that we used, inflating to 2.5 million annually. Right now, our budget is 1.7 million. A different number, we'll need over the years 18.6 million to address capital maintenance. This roof is falling in, this carpet needs to be replaced, et cetera, et cetera. We have some buildings that are way falling behind because of deferred maintenance. To replace the aging buildings in our campus master plan, we'll need around 49 million. These are dorms, athletic facilities, and the statewide Braille library, which is practically falling in and leaking on our Braille books, which are shared by all of the counties across the state. On slide 42, to become a state agency would require significant legislation that would either repeal or need to be changed and added. And we're also 3/4 of the way through our campus master plan, so that some consideration, if we became a state agency, would need to go into the fact that we are right now under the IAC funding until 2028. So we would have to go under DGS for that, which, I mean, it's not unsurmountable, but it's just another consideration. The next slide, merging the schools defined benefit plan to the state would be impossible due to ERISA requirements. So there would still be this $3 million liability each year for the next 10 years or so, unless the COLA and mortality rates tables change again, which would require more money. But so that wouldn't eliminate the problem, just becoming a state agency. Our private fundraising, we'd have to create a private foundation in order to continue private fundraising and collecting donations, which that could have an impact on our fundraising, as the maximum of the deduction is less for a private foundation versus a charity organization. So in conclusion, just to sum it all up here, the funding formula on page 45, the funding formula has not kept pace with population or with compensation needs for the school, especially considering our students with multiple disabilities. There's no difference in the residential service tuition or the amount that we receive for that. There is a model for compensation. Next slide, we're open to becoming a state agency, but becoming a state agency wouldn't necessarily solve the underlying problems. A quasi-state agency was explored fully in the legal brief that's included in the report. It could allow us to remain somewhat independent and deal with some of the private land and property and endowment issues. However, it wouldn't necessarily solve the problem without additional funding. The next slide talks about the students at MSB. Some of them, if we didn't have the school, would be sent out of state. I used to work at Perkins School for the Blind. I can attest to the fact that we had many students out of state. The tuition is $394,000 for residential out-of-state placements. I once had, I kid you not, a student from California who was a day student who won a big legal lawsuit from the state of California, and they moved the family to Cambridge, Massachusetts to be a day student at Perkins. So it's not just $394,000, it's all the other costs of housing and putting that family up. So even with increased funding, MSB is far less than that out-of-state tuition. And the final slide, or the next to the final slide, the board and the leadership team believes that it's the funding formula is the problem, is the source of this issue. The base appropriation needs to be reset. Weighted funding for disability and residential placement are ways to help, and legislation for compensation and benefits adjustments mirroring the School for the Deaf would help from keeping us from getting too far behind. Last slide, we're honored to serve. We're thankful to you And we're committed to working with you and keeping our school alive for our students and for our state.
Well, thank you very much for that comprehensive and thorough and succinct presentation. So ultimately, you all, the one takeaway from this is you're asking for a legislative change to the formula.
Right. Yes.
Chairman Barnes, I'm not seeing any questions right now. I don't know if you have anything to add, Mr. Chairman.
I don't see any. We did read the study beforehand, and we appreciate it. It does give us a nice roadmap. I mean, I think we're all very motivated to bring some relief to you and the great work you do this year. So it's a good roadmap for us to look at for session and to work off of. Are there any questions on the House side? Just throw up your hand if you don't see any.
Any questions on the Senate side? Okay. Well, thank you very much, everybody. I know that you have an important population to serve right now, so we'll let you get back to doing great work. And with that, that concludes today's briefing. We appreciate everybody's time.
Thank you.
Great.
Thanks for the work you do. Thank you.
Thank you very much.